The next hand I have here is versus Menu Morutu. At this point I hadn't played with him all that much, but definitely enough to get a couple of pretty significant reads. And he's quite an aggressive player. He's opening 79% of buttons, which is on the higher side, I suppose. And he's c-betting most boards, 82%. But the interesting statistics for this player is his full to 3-bet is only 55%, which is quite loose considering he's open 78%. And also his 3-bet percentage is 34%. So that is extremely aggressive. And I've been countering that by 4-betting him quite a high percentage. And he seems to have adjusted somewhat as he has been calling my 4-bets with a little bit of a lighter range. But onto this hand, he min raises from the button, and I decide to flat with ace deuce offsuit. This is a hand I like to have in my flatting range at this kind of stack size versus most players, because especially versus an aggressive player like this, he's going to be representing a lot of ace-high boards, since a lot of my good ace-x is going to be 3-betting pre-flop, and it can put me in a whole lot of difficult decisions if he starts barreling off on ace-high boards. So the flop comes down Queen 5-4 Rainbow, giving me an over as well as a gut shot draw. He c-bets half pot, and instantly this is a pretty close decision here. I'm never going to be folding this hand, but it's really a question of, do I want to check raise here or do I want to just flat? I decide to flat for a couple of reasons. Reason one being, I'm going to have the best hand here quite a high percentage of the time. And I don't want him to 3-bet bluff me on this flop, which this player is definitely capable of, because a check raise here would be representing quite a narrow range. Also, if an ace does peel off on the turn or the river here, I think that's going to be a fantastic card for him to be barreling. So we're going to be able to make some pretty good call downs here if an ace does come up. So I flat. The turn comes a 6, which is actually a very interesting card, and I'll explain why in a second here. I check it to him, and he bets. And his turn sizing here is 120 and 160, and so far he's been using two different types of turn sizing, 100 as well as 120. And I do have the read that his larger turn sizing is going to be more of his bluff range. From his perspective, this 6 is a pretty interesting card to be bluffing, because I definitely do have quite a few 6s in my range here. I could have potentially flatted the flop with 6-7. I could have Queen 6, 5-6, 4-6 suited. It's definitely a card that hits my range fairly strong. I think versus his turn range here, he is going to be barreling any 7, any 3, any queen. A lot of his 6x, because seeing as I flatted the flop, he's not going to put me on too many queen x. So in this spot, I decide to raise his turn bet. I decide to make it 280, which is not too large of a sizing, but it's definitely big enough to get him off of his bluffs, as well as potentially he can make quite a few kind of hero folds in this spot. And the reason why he can make some hero folds in this spot is because when I raise this turn here, it's very unlikely that I have a hand with absolutely no showdown value. In that regard, ace deuce offsuit is really at the bottom of my range here. Just as a general game theory point of view, bluffing with the bottom of your range is often a very good idea. Because when he looks at my raise here and he tries to put me on a sort of range, there's just very few hands here that I raise fold on this specific turn. If I had a hand like 5-6, I could play it this way. 4-6 suited, I could play it this way. Potentially Queen 6 that was slowing the flop a little bit. Or once in a while, I could even have 7-8. There's just quite a few very big hands that I can have in this position. even if he is sitting here with like Queen 9, Queen 10, it's going to be put him in an extremely hard spot, because versus the hands that I'm representing here, he has very little equity. I think versus this player, he is going to actually hero fold a lot of his Queen X on this turn. Now, versus a complete fish, a raise like this is not going to work as much, because you're just going to get flatted by so many different hands. All 3x, all 7x, every single one of his queens. Heck, versus an extremely player, they might think 2 overcards to the 6 is going to have some sort of outs here. But versus anyone who's kind of thinking here, my range is quite strong here, and there's just not a lot of hands in this spot that I can be bluffing with, that decide to peel flop out of position and check raise the turn as a bluff. That's just going to be a very, very small percentage of my range, because most of the time here I'm going to have a decent amount of showdown value when I just check call the flop. So he thinks about it for a while and decides to fold. I think versus most thinking villains at this kind of stake level, turn check raises are often considered as very, very strong hands. It's not a line that many players are using as a bluff, even when their opponent is barreling the turn a fairly high frequency. So it's definitely something that I like to do versus more thinking players, is check raise quite a few turns with a kind of a merged value range in a lot of different spots. Unlike a flop check raise, turn check raises tend to be 3-bet with a pretty tight range. Yeah, they will get called down light occasionally, but players are not fighting back with air all that much versus a turn check raise, which makes it an extremely profitable play in many situations. The next hand here is versus the same player. It's actually just a couple hands after, and it's a pretty interesting spot. So he raises pre, and I decide to flat out a big blind with A7 suited. Versus his raising percent pre-flop, definitely can think about 3-betting this hand or jamming it, but I as well like to have it in my flatting range. So the flop comes pretty good for us. It comes Queen 10 deuce, 2 diamonds, so we got a flush draw as well as an overcard and a backdoor straight draw. And I check to him with the intention of check raising. And if he does a standard c-bet of 80 here, I'm going to make it 200 and make it really tempting for all of his draws that are much weaker than ours to just jam over, and we can call and be in a very favorable spot. If he's got a lower flush draw, or even a hand like King Jack with King Diamonds, or maybe even with no diamonds, there's a very, very high probability he's just going to jam over our check raise. So I think that's a very good option here versus someone who c-bets at, right now it's saying 85%. So I check it to him. So he thinks about it for a second and ends up checking back the flop, which is obviously not what we wanted, but we still have a huge amount of equity in this hand, and his range here is going to be quite weak. When this player, who has a very high c-bet percentage, check back this flop, he's going to have a lot of ace highs, a lot of deuces, just some kind of mediocre showdown value that he doesn't want to build a big pot with, because a flop like this really is going to hit our out of position calling range quite hard, and it is going to be a flop that I'm going to check raise with quite a wide range, because it just hits us so hard and it's going to be quite profitable to do so. So on this turn, I decided that leading is the best option, and I think that leading is better because we're going to get him to fold a lot of his ace high type hands, as well as we're going to get him to fold a lot of his deuce X types hands that check back the flop. And just, if we look at our range in general, leading here is going to be better, because we're also going to be leading all of our 10x, our Queen X, our King Jack. So we definitely want to have this hand in our leading range here. Versus some opponents, I may consider a check raise here versus people that check back the flop for pot control and then kind of bet for thin value on the turn. But versus this opponent, I think if we check here, it's just going to get checked back an extremely high percentage of the time. So I bet 80, half pot. So he thinks about it and decides to flat. And this river seems like not too bad of a card for us. We're definitely going to be able to get value from maybe his pairs from 6s to 9s that decided to check back the flop. Maybe considers a hero call with a 10x or even a hand such as King 5. Because this ace is not going to hit our range here all that often after we lead the turn, because a lot of our ace x we may consider checking the turn kind of to keep a small pot, and we have some showdown value with the ace high. In terms of what hands we can have on this river, most of the hands we have here are not going to be ace x. We can have ace deuce, ace 5, because we're going to be 3-betting ace 10, ace queen pre-flop. And with a hand like, say we have ace 7, which we have now, but no diamonds, we are going to be probably checking this turn quite a bit of time, because just hoping that we can get to a river cheap and our ace high is good. So from that perspective, this ace is not a great card for our range. Versus a thinking opponent here, when we bet this river, it's going to look like we're trying to get some value from a queen x, a good 10 a lot of the time. Occasionally we are going to have king jack and some stronger hands. So I decided to bet for value with the thought process that, you know, there's not a whole lot of ace x in our range in this spot, and he can look us up pretty lightly because it kind of looks like a river that we're going to be bluffing some percentage of the time, because it may appear a little bit like a scare card for all of his you know, deuce x, 5x, 6s through 9s. So I decided to bet 200, and this bet is designed to get calls from a 10x that did check back, a hero call by a hand like king 5, as well as there is a couple of worse ace x's in his range. He can have ace 6 and ace 4 and ace 3. So there's definitely some value to be had here. So he thinks about it for a second, and then he jams all in. At this point, it's a fairly difficult decision for us, because we're really at the top of our range in this spot. And this ace x from his perspective looks like a really great card to bluff at. The problem here is that since he did check back the flop, I'm giving him a lot of showdown value. And I'm not that convinced that this player is going to be turning any strong showdown value into a bluff here. I don't see him turning 10x into a bluff here. So versus shoving range here, I actually think we're doing fairly poorly. It's unlikely that he's going to be overplaying a ace 3 or ace 6 type hand. And it is possible he has ace king or ace jack. So if we put his kind of river raising range here to ace deuce, ace 5, ace king, ace jack, and then bluffs. And his bluffs likely do have at least a pair, since he's a person that's not going to check back the flop without some sort of showdown value, be it a deuce or an ace high. So, seeing as he's repping quite a narrow range here, I do decide to look him up. And I really am not happy with my play in this hand. I think that a bet fold versus this particular opponent in this spot is going to be superior. Well, there is some bluffs in his range here. I don't see him turning too much showdown value into a bluff, and I don't see him checking back the flop without some showdown value. So I think I did play this river pretty terribly, and I think the correct play is to bet. I think the amount is fine, 200, and then to fold to his jam without very significant read that he can turn, you know, hands like 10x into a bluff here. So we are out of time for this video. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, please feel free to post them, and I will try to get back to you. Thanks.